Why are you doing this to yourself?
Because it makes me happy, okay?
Hated it.
I am a liberal, but I am also a Christian.
Do you remember the TV stars who vanished mid-series without saying goodbye? These were the faces we welcomed into our homes each week, whose stories felt like part of our own routines and rhythms. But behind the laughter and drama, what really made them walk away so suddenly? You know those moments where a character vanishes and you're still looking at the screen wondering if maybe they just missed their cue? Yeah, that was McLean Stevenson in MASH. The man who played the ever-affable Colonel Henry Blake had fans hooked on his warmth, humor, and easy charm. He was like the sitcom version of a well-worn cardigan. Cozy, dependable, a little wrinkled maybe, but you would not trade him for anything else on a weeknight. That is why what happened next hit like a surprise punch to the gut. See, McLean did not just leave MASH. He disappeared from the show without a real goodbye. They did not tease his exit, did not give him a slow send-off, and they definitely did not prepare the audience. One episode you were watching Henry Blake get ready to go home, the next you were being told, off-screen no less, that his plane had been shot down. Just like that. Done. It was cruel in a way that only hits harder when you realize it mirrored the suddenness of real wartime loss. Thing is, McLean thought he was making a smart move. He left the show to pursue a variety career, thinking that his popularity from MASH would carry over into solo stardom. But none of his post-MASH projects ever took off the same way. There were game show appearances, some guest spots, even a few short-lived sitcoms. But fans kept wondering why Henry Blake never got a proper farewell, like a slow fade or a teary last hug. Instead, they got silence. And maybe that silence was the point. Behind the scenes, writers debated the tone of his exit. They wanted to show the real cost of war, how no one was safe, but fans were not ready for it. They were tuning in for a familiar face and a moment of levity. Instead, they got blindsided by one of the most quietly heartbreaking character deaths in television history. And McLean? He never looked back. But maybe, just maybe, he should have. Because people still ask about Henry Blake, still wonder if he knew how much we missed him. Now here is a story that still stings for a whole lot of people. Shelley Long leaving Cheers in the middle of its golden years? That was not just a TV shakeup. That was a cultural tremor. Diane Chambers was not everyone's favorite, sure. She was overly articulate, slightly smug, and seemed like she would correct your grammar at a barbecue. But Shelley Long made her unforgettable. She was the rhythm of Cheers in those early seasons. And without warning, that rhythm stopped. Back in the day, Cheers was more than a sitcom. It was a weeknight routine. You did not just tune in for the jokes, you showed up for the banter, the sarcasm, the unresolved tension between Sam and Diane. Especially that. Shelley Long and Ted Danson had chemistry you could write a book about, then burn the book because no one else could ever replicate it. That will they, won't they drama? It kept people watching, hoping, arguing with their friends after each episode. So when Shelley announced she was leaving at the end of season 5, people were shocked. Not only because Diane and Sam had not reached that satisfying end we all craved, but because she just walked away. No grand gesture, no final laugh, just a so long behind the scenes and a quick exit on camera. The show made do, wrote her off in a way that felt like a quick patch on a tear that needed stitching. And yes, Cheers survived, even thrived. But something changed. Turns out Shelley Long had big dreams. She wanted to do movies, pursue other acting opportunities, explore drama. And while she did land a few roles, notably in the Brady Bunch movie and some smaller features, the magic of Diane never quite left her shadow. Audiences were left wondering what could have been. What would it have looked like if Diane stayed? If the writers had closed her story with care instead of scrambling to rewrite the show's heart? Maybe the hardest part was that Shelley never really said goodbye. Not to Sam, not to the bar, not to the viewers at home. And when someone leaves like that, not with a bang, but a shrug, it stays with you. like a story someone stopped telling right before the ending. David Caruso's exit from NYPD Blue was not just a headline. It was a moment. You remember it, even if you only half-watched the show back then. Detective John Kelly, fiery, charismatic with that brooding New York swagger, was the star. The one people showed up for. The one promos bragged about. And then, almost overnight, gone. Not a slow fade, not a proper farewell, just off the screen like he never even had a badge. The timing could not have been worse. NYPD Blue was making noise, controversial, gritty, raw. It was the water cooler show, and Caruso? He was the face of that. So when he dipped out after just one season, one wildly successful season, people were left stunned. This was not just a character leaving. This was the main character, the heartbeat, the guy who kicked in doors and made TV cops feel real again. Behind closed doors, it was all about contracts. Caruso wanted a raise, a big one. He wanted movie star money, and honestly, he thought he was ready for movie star fame. The producers said no. So he walked. Bold move, sure. But it came with a price, because while Caruso did go on to do a few films, none of them stuck. The roles were forgettable, the scripts mediocre. And the audience? They remembered the walkout more than the performances. NYPD Blue had to patch the hole fast. They brought in Jimmy Smits, who did a fantastic job, but the shadow of Caruso's abrupt departure hung over the show for a while. It is like when a band loses its lead singer. Even if the new one is good, you can still hear the old voice echoing in the background. Viewers felt it, like something had broken just as it was getting good. And Caruso? He eventually found his way back to TV with CSI Miami, complete with sunglasses and one-liners. But people never forgot that first exit, that vanishing act, that unfinished chapter in what could have been a defining TV run. When a character disappears at the peak of their power, the absence rings louder than any performance. And for some of us, that silence still has not been filled. You could almost hear the record scratch when Valerie Harper disappeared from her own show, not a side character, not a guest star, the title character. Imagine tuning in week after week to watch Valerie, only to realize suddenly that the Valerie part was just gone. The show kept going, sure. They even changed the name. But for fans, that original spark? It left with her. This was not just some sitcom character swap. Valerie Harper was a television staple. People knew her from Rhoda, loved her for her humor, and stuck around for the realness she brought to family life on Valerie. She was the working mom, the glue, the one juggling it all while somehow making you laugh through the stress. In a world of picture-perfect TV families, she felt like the one who might live next door. Then came the off-screen drama, contract disputes, salary disagreements. And when Valerie tried to negotiate a better deal, things went sour fast. Before anyone could blink, she was fired, not written off gently or given a thoughtful goodbye. Just cut. And in the next episode, there was a whole new tone, a slightly different rhythm, and Sandy Duncan suddenly stepping into the spotlight. The show was renamed The Hogan Family, like it was just business as usual, except it was not. Fans were left stunned. Valerie's character was abruptly killed off in a car accident, off-screen, with barely more than a few lines of dialogue to explain it. That was it. No goodbye, no closure. The woman whose name was on the door never even got to close it. It was like someone ripping the last chapter out of a book you loved and saying, you get the idea. The show actually did well without her, which only made the sting sharper. But people never really forgot how it happened. It felt wrong, cold. Not just to Valerie, but to the viewers who had welcomed her into their living rooms every week. Maybe the show moved on. But for a lot of us, Valerie never really left. Because when someone exits without saying goodbye, their presence lingers in a way that is impossible to replace. There are television exits, and then there are Shannon Doherty exits, the kind that come with rumors, headlines, and a whole lot of raised eyebrows. Back in the early 1990s, Beverly Hills 90210 was not just a teen drama. It was the teen drama. And Brenda Walsh? She was right in the middle of it all. Smart, rebellious, complicated, unforgettable. So when Shannon Doherty left the show, it was not just a casting change. It was like pulling the fire alarm in the middle of prom. No one knew exactly what happened, but everyone had a theory. Was it conflict with castmates? Trouble with producers? Too much press? The truth was probably somewhere in the mess of it all. But what mattered most to viewers was that Brenda was suddenly gone. And the show never really addressed it in a way that felt honest. She went to Paris. Or maybe to college. Maybe she just disappeared into the fog of off-screen silence. Either way, fans were left confused. One minute she was at the center of every emotional plotline, the next she was just not there. And the tension behind her exit only made the whole thing feel heavier. The cast reportedly had issues with her attitude, showing up late to set, even walking off scenes. But still, the Brenda-shaped hole she left behind, it never fully closed. See, for all her controversy, Shannon brought something real to that show. Brenda felt like someone you knew, or maybe were. Emotional, impulsive, fiercely loyal. Her fights with Dylan and Kelly were not just plot points. They were the stuff of hallway debates and whispered lunchroom gossip. Brenda was the voice of a certain kind of girlhood, sharp-edged, honest, a little lost. After she left, the show tried to recalibrate. Enter new characters, shift the focus, keep the engine running. But fans noticed. Ratings dipped, chemistry changed, and while 90210 carried on, it never really got Brenda back. Not the way we remembered her. Even when she returned years later for a reboot, it felt more like a whisper than a scream. That is what happens when someone leaves without saying goodbye. You do not move on. You wait, quietly, wondering if they will ever walk back through the door. It is one thing for a character to leave a show. It is another for a father to vanish. That is how it felt when John Amos disappeared from Good Times. One moment, James Evans Sr. was holding his family together with quiet strength and hard-earned wisdom. The next, he was just gone. No hug, no final family dinner, just a letter, and 3 words that hit like a truck. James is dead. Fans could not believe it. This was not just some background character fading into the credits. This was the heart of the family. The father figure who showed up every episode with tough love, moral backbone, and a tired look that said he worked a double shift just to keep the lights on. James Evans was real, and John Amos made him feel like someone you might actually know. Maybe your dad. Maybe someone else's, but definitely someone who mattered. The reason he left? Behind the scenes, things were tense. Amos was outspoken. He did not like where the show was headed, thought it was leaning too much into comedy and not enough into the real issues facing working-class black families. He wanted dignity. The producers wanted laughs. And in a move that still hurts to talk about, they fired him. So how did the show explain it? A single line. James had died in a car crash. No funeral, no goodbyes, no final moments, just grief, raw and unexplored. For fans who tuned in every week, who grew up watching this family struggle and survive together, it felt like a betrayal, not just of the character, but of the story. And yet somehow, Good Times kept going. Florida Evans held it together, the kids carried on, and the show still had its moments. But it was not the same. Because James was more than a character. He was a presence, a grounding force. And losing him without warning, without closure, left a crack in the foundation that never really healed. You can still hear people talk about it today. That one moment when James is dead echoed through the screen, when a whole era of television lost one of its most important voices. And for a lot of us, we are still waiting for the goodbye we never got. You could tell right away that Damon Wayans was different. He was the spark, the one who made the sketches on In Living Color feel sharper, funnier, and sometimes downright explosive. From Homie D. Clown to the loudest, wildest characters on screen, he pushed boundaries, and you knew it. But then, just like that, gone. No announcement, no goodbye. Just a missing face in a cast built on chaos and rhythm, suddenly out of sync. Back in the early 1990s, In Living Color was not just another sketch show. It was a cultural moment, a stage where Black comedians, dancers, and artists got to shine in a way that was long overdue. Damon Wayans was right in the center of that revolution. He helped shape its voice, brought edge, brought danger, and brought laughs that made your stomach hurt. He was not just in the cast, he was the vibe. So why did he leave so suddenly? The story behind the scenes was a messy one. Creative differences, tension with producers. Damon reportedly felt stifled, like his ideas were being boxed in, his voice muffled in a show that was supposed to be about freedom. And when push came to shove, he walked. Just one day, he was not on screen anymore. No skit, no send-off, no Homie D clown bowing out for good. Fans noticed. Of course they did. One week, you were quoting his jokes with your friends. The next, you were wondering if you had missed an episode. But you had not. The show just kept moving forward like nothing had happened. Damon was replaced, rotated out like a piece in a machine. But the energy changed, the edge dulled, the rhythm wobbled. He moved on to movies, Major Payne, The Last Boy Scout, and others. He made a name for himself, sure, but for those who remembered those early In Living Color days, his exit left something behind, a sense of unfinished business. Like someone yanked the mic out of his hand mid-punchline. In a show built on attitude and raw creativity, Damon's disappearance felt like more than just a cast shakeup. It felt like the moment when rebellion met reality, and reality won. You ever feel like you watched a sitcom grow colder right before your eyes? That is what happened when Suzanne Summers vanished from Three's Company. One day, she was Chrissy Snow, bright, bubbly, a little ditzy, but totally magnetic. The next, she was barely showing up, sometimes just on the phone, and then nothing. No hug, no final laugh, no curtain call, just static where a star used to be. For a while, Three's Company was the crown jewel of network television. You had the misunderstandings, the slapstick, the risque jokes that somehow got past the censors. But at the center of it all was Chrissy. Suzanne Summers turned what could have been a one-note blonde stereotype into something more. She was lovable. She was funny. She was the reason people tuned in. But then came the contract dispute. Suzanne asked for equal pay, the same as her male co-stars. Fair, right? Not in Hollywood at the time. Producers pushed back, tensions rose, and before long, she was being phased out, episode by episode, until she just disappeared completely. Not because her character left town, not because the story called for it, but because she asked for what she was worth. The fans were left wondering. No send-off, no moment of closure, just a new roommate and a strange silence around what had once been the show's biggest draw. The chemistry shifted. The rhythm got offbeat. And even though the show carried on for a few more seasons, it never felt quite the same. Suzanne went on to become a pop culture icon in her own right. Fitness tapes, books, business ventures. She built an empire. But for those who grew up with Three's Company, the way she was dismissed never sat right. It was more than a casting change. It was a reminder of how fast things could turn when you spoke up. And when a character leaves without a goodbye, it does not just leave a hole in the show. It leaves one in you, too. Especially when they were the reason you laughed in the first place. Lisa Bonet had a kind of presence that you did not see often on 1980s television. Cool, artistic, effortlessly stylish, she was not just playing Denise Huxtable. She was Denise Huxtable. So when she got her own spin-off, A Different World, it felt like a natural next step. But barely one season in, that familiar face vanished. Quietly. Without ceremony, just gone. The premise was simple. Denise going off to college, figuring herself out, navigating life beyond the Huxtable living room. But behind the scenes, it was anything but simple. Lisa Bonet's life was changing fast. She had just married musician Lenny Kravitz. She was pregnant, and her vision for the character, deeper, more grounded, more real, clashed with what the network wanted. Bill Cosby, who oversaw the show, reportedly had strong opinions. He did not like the direction Denise was heading, and suddenly Lisa was out. Officially, it was framed as creative differences, but fans could see through that. The show pivoted, the cast reshuffled, and Denise never really got a final scene, just an offhand mention here and there, as if she had quietly transferred or faded into the campus crowd. It was frustrating. Denise Huxtable was more than a sitcom character. She was a reflection of a generation trying to be both traditional and rebellious. The kind of daughter who wore vintage jackets, quoted poetry, and still managed to bring heart to every scene. Lisa Bonet gave her soul, and that soul was never given a proper farewell. A Different World went on to become something special in its own right. A show about young black college life that tackled real issues and introduced powerful new characters. But for those who tuned in expecting to follow Denise's journey, her disappearance felt personal, like being left out of your best friend's big moment. Lisa returned later to The Cosby Show, briefly, but it never quite clicked the same way. The magic had moved on. And for a lot of us, so had the questions. What would a different world have looked like if Lisa had stayed? Would Denise have grown into the woman we always hoped she would? Or was she never meant to say goodbye, just quietly walk out of frame and into something more real? When Star Trek: The Next Generation launched, it felt like something big, something that could stand proudly alongside the original. And part of that was because of Lieutenant Tasha Yar. Denise Crosby brought this quiet toughness to the role. She was not just another uniform in the background. She was strong, grounded, someone you believed could actually handle herself in deep space. And then, she was gone. Just like that, not beamed out, just written off. It was season 1. Early days. Viewers were just getting comfortable, getting to know the ship, the crew, the new dynamic. And Tasha was part of that emotional anchor. When she died, in a blink and you'll miss it moment during an alien encounter, fans were stunned. It was not dramatic, it was not noble, it was just sudden and harsh. And somehow, it made her feel disposable in a show that always promised meaning behind every mission. Behind the scenes, Denise Crosby was frustrated. She felt like Tasha Yar had no direction, no depth, no real story beyond barking orders on the bridge and standing next to Captain Picard. And she was right. Her character had been sidelined more than once, so she asked to leave, but the writers gave her an ending that was less an arc and more a footnote. They had the whole galaxy, and they still could not figure out how to say goodbye properly. The fans? They noticed. Big time. Star Trek fans are not casual viewers. They remember every detail, every choice, every thread left hanging. And Tasha's exit felt wrong. Not just rushed, but empty. Like a story someone gave up on halfway through. Years later, Crosby returned for a few episodes, an alternate timeline, a clone, some clever tricks to bring her back, if only for a moment. But it was never quite the same. You could still feel that missing closure, that moment we never got, when the crew and the viewers could say a real goodbye. Because in a universe built on exploration and second chances, losing someone like Tasha without meaning, that just feels like a missed opportunity. Delta Burke did not just play Suzanne Sugarbaker, she was Suzanne Sugarbaker. Big hair, big personality, and even bigger one-liners. She brought a southern charm to designing women that no one else could touch. So when she vanished from the show without much warning, fans were left with a question that never really got answered. What happened? In front of the camera, it was witty and glamorous. 4 smart, funny women running an interior design firm and making you laugh while doing it. But behind the scenes, it was tense. Delta clashed with the show's creators and some of her co-stars. There were rumors about on-set feuds, missed days, and too many disagreements to count. Eventually, things boiled over. Contracts ended, and Delta walked. When she left, the show tried to adjust, brought in new characters, changed the flow. But it was not the same. Suzanne was more than just comic relief. She was the contrast, the balance to Julia's fire and Mary Jo's calm. Without her, something was missing. You could feel the shift in every episode after. And the way it happened? No fanfare, no proper send-off. They wrote her out in a few lines. No goodbye, no thanks for the memories, just an awkward absence explained away with a plot excuse. For a show built around relationships and personality, it felt surprisingly impersonal. Delta later spoke out about her struggles, with anxiety, with body image, with the pressure to perform. It painted her exit in a whole new light. She was not just difficult, she was overwhelmed. And the way Hollywood handled that in the 1990s, not with kindness. She came back to acting eventually, did a few reunions and made peace with her castmates, but the mark she left on designing women and the way she was removed never quite faded. It was a reminder that no matter how big the character, no matter how iconic the performance, television can be an unforgiving place, especially when someone walks away without getting to say goodbye. It is rare for a character to disappear more than once, but that is exactly what happened with Mike Evans on The Jeffersons. He played Lionel, the smart, funny, grounded son of George and Louise. Lionel was not just part of the furniture, he was the bridge between generations, the son who kept his cool while his father lost his mind. And just when you thought he was settling in, gone, then back, then gone again. It was confusing, and not just for the audience. One season, Lionel was there, cracking jokes, anchoring storylines. The next, another actor was playing him, or sometimes no one at all. There was no grand exit, no emotional farewell. He was just not around anymore, like someone forgot to write him into the next script. Part of the confusion was that Mike Evans had also been one of the original creators of Good Times. He had his hand in multiple projects. So when he left The Jeffersons the first time, it was to focus on writing and producing. Fair enough. But the show never handled his absences with clarity. They shuffled actors. They dodged explanations. And fans were left wondering what happened to one of the most grounded characters on the show. It felt strange because The Jeffersons was built on character dynamics. George's outbursts, Louise's calm strength, and Lionel's modern take on everything made it all work. Take him out, and the family rhythm was off. Even when Evans returned later, it never fully clicked again. The truth is, Lionel was a symbol of change, of upward mobility, of a younger generation trying to hold on to their roots while reaching for more. Mike Evans gave that role weight, and losing him, repeatedly and without warning, made the show feel a little less steady each time. He passed away in 2006, and fans still talk about him. Still wonder what The Jeffersons could have been with a more consistent Lionel, one who got a proper arc, a proper goodbye. Because even in comedy, especially in family stories, when someone disappears without a real exit, it sticks with you. It always does. Michael J. Fox leaving Spin City was not just a television moment, it was something you felt in your chest. He was the soul of the show. His character, Deputy Mayor Mike Flaherty, held the chaos together with a grin and a one-liner. Week after week, he made government dysfunction feel like a sitcom, charming, quick, full of rhythm. But suddenly, that rhythm changed. And the goodbye? It came fast. Too fast. This was not a messy departure or a contract fight. It was real life. Michael J. Fox had gone public with his Parkinson's diagnosis, and the toll it was taking finally became too much to ignore. When he announced he was stepping away, there was no bitterness, just sadness. From him, from the cast, from the fans. You could feel it in his final episodes, how much was being held together behind the scenes. The show did what it could. They gave him a storyline that let him bow out with grace, a new job offer, a chance to walk away with dignity. But even with the script doing its best, the ache was there. That this was not just a character leaving, it was a man stepping back from the thing he loved. Spin City continued with Charlie Sheen in the lead. It was fine, funny even. But it never had that same heart, that balance of vulnerability and wit that Fox brought to every scene. And for fans, it felt like the end of an era. Michael J. Fox went on to become an advocate, a voice for others living with Parkinson's. But his quiet exit from Spin City still lingers. It was not scandalous. It was human. And that somehow made it all the more unforgettable. Wayne Rogers, M-A-S-H. Wayne Rogers never got a proper goodbye on MASH, and that still bugs a lot of fans. He played Trapper John, the wisecracking surgeon who balanced out Hawkeye's sarcasm with his own brand of charm. The two of them were a duo, a rhythm, a kind of friendship that made the show feel less like a war zone and more like something oddly comforting. And then, poof, Trapper was just gone. There was no goodbye episode, no farewell drink, no emotional handshake in the swamp. Viewers tuned into the new season expecting more of the same, only to be told that Trapper had shipped out, off-screen, without telling Hawkeye, or the rest of us. It was jarring. Like a friend moved away without saying anything. Behind the scenes, Rogers had grown frustrated. He wanted more from the writing, more depth, more equality in the storytelling. When he realized his character was being overshadowed, he left. Quietly. No drama. Just a closed door behind the camera and an awkward patch job in the script. They brought in B.J. Honeycutt, and he was great. But the hole Trapper left never quite got filled. Because he was more than just Hawkeye's sidekick. He was part of the heart of the show. The laughter in the middle of the madness. Years later, Wayne Rogers said he had no regrets. He went on to a successful career in business and occasionally showed up on talk shows, reflecting on his time in Korea, or at least the version filmed on a California backlot. But for fans of MASH, Trapper's vanishing act still feels unfinished. Still feels like we all missed a goodbye we should have gotten. Richie Edwards, Walker, Texas Ranger. Now here is a name that left quietly, so quietly in fact, that most fans never even noticed. Richie Edwards was a supporting actor on Walker, Texas Ranger, a show famous for its action, slow-motion kicks, and Chuck Norris-approved justice. And while he was never the star, he was a regular presence, part of the cast fabric, part of the backdrop of all those long Texas roads and tense showdowns, until he just stopped showing up. No dramatic plot twist, no exit scene. He was just not there anymore, like someone hit the delete key halfway through a script. And because the show kept moving, fast-paced and focused on the big moments, no one ever really addressed it. Not on screen, not in press releases, not even in fan forums, not until much later. Edwards had reportedly moved on from acting, tired of the routine, ready for something quieter. But television, especially back then, did not know how to handle exits like that. If a character was not central to the main plot, the audience was simply expected to forget. But some fans did not forget. They remembered the way he filled out scenes, added weight to group shots, made the world feel fuller. And so his disappearance feels like something you only notice later, like missing furniture in a familiar room. Something feels off, but you cannot quite say what. Not every exit is headline-worthy. Not every character gets a final monologue, but when someone disappears without a trace, not just from the screen but from memory, it sticks with you in a different way. Quiet, unsettling, unfinished. Just like Richie's last scene. Robbie Rist had one of those careers that felt like a pop culture glitch. He joined the Brady Bunch at the tail end of its run, playing Cousin Oliver, the character that showed up just in time to get blamed for the show's decline. Unfair? Absolutely. But that is how fans remember him. The kid who came in with the bowl cut and big glasses, trying to inject new energy into a series already fading. He was the punchline in a joke he did not write, and somehow he stuck around anyway. His resilience got buried under the noise, but it never really cracked. Still, Robbie Rist was everywhere for a while. Guest roles on everything from Chips to The Bionic Woman. He even lent his voice to animated shows and commercials. And if you ever watched Kid Video, that weird Saturday morning mashup of cartoons and live-action music videos, you definitely heard him sing. But after that, Robbie Rist seemed to vanish. What most people missed was that he never really left. He just slipped into the background. He became a voice actor, a musician, a producer. He played Michelangelo in the original Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movies. Yes, that Michelangelo. You never saw his face, but his voice became part of a generation's memory. He also worked behind the scenes on independent films, played in bands, built an entire life doing what he loved, just not in front of a live studio audience. There is something strangely poetic about that. Robbie started as the kid who was too late for a beloved show. He got typecast, laughed at, written off. But instead of burning out, he transformed. He kept working, kept evolving. And yet, in the public's mind, he disappeared. Not because he failed, not because he fell apart, but because he became invisible on purpose. It is a reminder that not all vanishings are tragedies. Some are reinventions, some are escapes, and sometimes the kid who got blamed for ending the Brady Bunch turns out to be one of the few who figured out how to survive it. Animorphs was one of those shows you watched with your face close to the screen, not because you were excited, but because you were confused, scared, and absolutely hooked. It was not polished, not even close. The special effects were low budget. The lighting was strange. But the story? The story was unlike anything you had ever seen. Teenagers turning into animals to fight off a secret alien invasion. That alone was enough to grab your attention. But then came the darkness, the questions, the weight. What happens when you cannot turn back? When war makes you lose your humanity, literally. Animorphs was not afraid to go there. It took big philosophical themes and squeezed them into a teen drama that never let you get too comfortable. Each transformation came with a cost. The characters were not superheroes. They were scared kids forced to carry secrets bigger than they could understand. And underneath the sci-fi weirdness was a terrifying truth. Sometimes growing up means becoming something you do not recognize. The show was intense, quietly tragic. It made you think about sacrifice, identity, and what it means to protect the people you love, even if it means losing yourself along the way. Animorphs was messy, yes, but so is adolescence, and that is exactly why it mattered. Lori Foreman was the big sister you loved to hate on that 70s show. Sarcastic, manipulative, and endlessly flirty, she was the queen bee of basement drama. Lori added chaos to the Foreman household in all the best ways, but after season 3, she simply disappeared. No explanation, no goodbye. When she did return in season 5, she was played by a different actress, and just as quickly, she vanished again. The show moved on, like Lori had never left her mark on Point Place. No one even blinked. She was not just a punchline, she was an emotional bomb waiting to go off in every room she entered. Her presence made Eric weaker, Kitty more nervous, and Red quietly furious. She was the part of the family that was never stable, and that was what made her essential. Without her, the Foremans felt safer, but a little less real. In real life, her original actress was reportedly dealing with personal struggles, and the show recast her to keep the storyline moving. But the final vanishing left a strange echo, one that felt unfinished. Lori was a complicated character, but she was also real. She represented rebellion, bad decisions, and the uncomfortable truths about growing up. To see her erased without comment, without conclusion, left a void that was never quite filled. How do you close the door on someone who made the house feel alive? Mike Vitar was the kind of kid who made every summer feel like it could last forever. As Benny the Jet Rodriguez in The Sandlot, he was a symbol of speed, freedom, and the unbreakable magic of childhood friendship. And in the Mighty Ducks sequels, he brought that same fire to the ice. He was not just playing characters, he was becoming memories, the kind that stuck with you long after the credits rolled. But somewhere between the bases and the blue lines, Mike disappeared. There was no farewell press tour, no dramatic scandal, just a quiet exit in the late 1990s, as if he had run the bases one last time and never looked back. While the world was still quoting his lines and wearing Sandlot t-shirts, Mike was stepping into a new uniform, one that would define the rest of his life. He became a firefighter, a real one, not a role, not a scene, a life-risking, people-saving, dawn-to-dusk kind of job. It is the kind of pivot that tells you something about who he truly was. Fame might have found him, but it never changed him. And while the industry kept calling, Mike had already answered a different kind of call. There is something poetic about that. A child star walking away not out of failure but out of purpose. He did not want to be remembered. He wanted to matter. And maybe that is why his disappearance feels less like a loss and more like a story we were lucky to witness, even if only for a while. Because some heroes do not wear costumes on screen. Some wear helmets and carry hoses. When Who's the Boss was in its prime, Danny Pintaro was the kid next door, literally. He played Jonathan Bauer, Angela's shy, sensitive son, and the character felt like a quiet heartbeat in a house full of bigger personalities. In a sitcom world that often demanded punchlines and catchphrases, Danny's role was different. He was thoughtful, sweet, sometimes awkward, and in that stillness, a lot of viewers saw themselves. Not every kid was the star athlete or the class clown. Some were just trying to figure it out. Off-screen, though, life was harder to figure out. Danny faded from the spotlight not long after the show ended. He did some stage acting, went to college, tried to live something like a normal life. But when you grow up on television, normal is a moving target. He came out as gay in the late 1990s, quietly, long before Hollywood was ready to handle it. There was no press tour, no big announcement, just a guy trying to be honest with himself. Years later, the headlines returned. Not for a comeback role, not for a directing credit, but because Danny revealed he had been living with HIV. He shared the news with grace, transparency, and a kind of steadiness that felt so familiar if you had watched him growing up on that little screen. It was a powerful moment, but it came and went in the way stories about former child actors often do, briefly trending, then forgotten. The hard truth is, by the time Danny told his truth, most of the world had already moved on. And yet, what sticks with you is not the drama. It is the gentleness, the courage in the quiet. That same soft presence he brought to Who's the Boss, a presence that made the show more human, more relatable, is still part of who he is today. He might not have headlines anymore, no red carpets, no sitcom revivals, but he matters. And maybe that is what disappearing without a trace really means. Not that you are gone, but that people stopped looking. The Adventures of Pete and Pete was not a show, it was a feeling. The kind that snuck into your heart through the weird back door of childhood and never really left. Two brothers, same name. A small town full of the strangest people you could imagine. But it never felt like a joke. It felt like truth, wrapped in surreal humor and drenched in quiet sadness. Pete and Pete was about childhood, but not in the usual shiny, safe way. It was about how weird and painful and magical it can all be. How a metal plate in your head might pick up radio signals. How your mom might wrestle a bowling trophy. How your best friend might just be the strongest man in the world, and no one would question it. The show never explained itself, because life does not explain itself, it just happens. Pete and Pete let you sit in that weirdness. It let you feel confused and still completely seen. The music was dreamy. The visuals were raw. And the voiceover from Big Pete had the kind of melancholy wisdom that only makes sense after you grow up. This show made you nostalgic while you were still living the moment. And now, years later, it feels like opening a box of memories you forgot you buried. Tina Pinciotti was Donna's younger sister on that 70s show, but only for a moment. She appeared in one episode of season 1, a sweet, red-haired kid who brought a sense of family chaos to the Pinciotti home. Then, like a ghost in a foggy memory, Tina was never seen or mentioned again. It is not that she moved away. It is not that she had a dramatic exit. It is that she simply stopped existing. Later episodes referred to Donna as an only child. No explanations, no flashbacks, just silence. The living room where she once stood felt suddenly incomplete. Donna's parents never mourned her, joked about her, or slipped up and mentioned her in conversation. The family portrait was edited, and no one acted like it had ever looked different. That kind of vanishing does not just delete a character, it rewrites everyone else. And it is the silence that hurts the most. Because for a show that was built on nostalgia, on growing up and letting go, Tina's vanishing felt like a betrayal of everything the show stood for. She was not a side character in a fantasy drama. She was a kid sister in a show about adolescence, where every relationship mattered. In real life, she was probably cut due to story streamlining. But in the world of the show, her disappearance is a strange wrinkle in time, one that reminds us how easy it is to rewrite a family, and how quickly we accept it. Jake Lloyd should have been remembered as a legend. After all, how many children can say they played Anakin Skywalker in one of the most anticipated films in cinema history? But instead of being celebrated, Jake became a warning. Star Wars, Episode 1, The Phantom Menace introduced the world to young Anakin, but it also introduced Jake to something far more dangerous than Sith Lords. Fame at that level was not a dream, it was a trap. Almost immediately, the backlash began. Critics tore into the film, viewers mocked his performance, kids at school bullied him relentlessly. Jake was not just ridiculed, he was targeted. The line between character and child was blurred so harshly that the person underneath began to vanish. He was only 10 years old, 10, and instead of protecting him, the industry left him behind. He did not just quit acting, he rejected it entirely. He destroyed his film memorabilia. He spoke of how toxic his experience had been. He wanted nothing to do with the world that had once promised him everything. In the years that followed, Jake struggled. With mental health, with the weight of a childhood that was not his own. There were moments of hope, followed by stories that made headlines for the wrong reasons. But none of them changed the core truth. He was a boy who never asked for the world to know his name. And when they did, it cost him everything. There is something deeply unfair about his story. A role that should have launched him into a lifetime of success became the reason he walked away. Or maybe ran. And now, all we are left with is silence and the question of what could have been. Lisa Whelchel was the kind of 80s icon who made it all look effortless. She played Blair Warner on The Facts of Life, the rich girl with the perfect hair, the sharp tongue, and a soft side that peeked through just enough to make you root for her. Blair was more than a character. She was a blueprint. Every show that came after with a glamorous, overconfident teen owes a little something to Lisa Whelchel. She was everywhere for a while. Talk shows, awards specials, sitcom guest spots. She had the smile, the charisma, the look. But then she disappeared. And not in the usual child star way. There were no arrests, no breakdowns, no bitter interviews. Lisa just walked away. What most people did not realize is that she had already made her choice. She turned down more acting work. She refused a role on Friends. She left Hollywood at the height of her fame to focus on faith, family, and privacy. In the middle of all that glamour, she took a step most stars would not even consider. She left the spotlight because she wanted to. She became a Christian author, a public speaker, a homeschooling mom. For years, her life was more about church retreats and parenting workshops than red carpets. And she was fine with that. She built a whole new identity outside the industry that made her famous. But that choice came with a trade-off. For viewers, it felt like losing someone familiar. Blair Warner had been part of the weekly routine, like a sarcastic older sister who taught you life's tougher lessons. And when Lisa Whelchel vanished, it was like a light went out in the room. She made a brief return on Survivor in the early 2010s, surprising everyone with her resilience and vulnerability. For a moment, it felt like a comeback, but even that felt like a visit, not a return. Lisa Whelchel did not fall from fame. She stepped off it gently and deliberately, and in doing so, she became one of the rare child stars who did not get swallowed by it. Still, you cannot help but miss the way she used to light up the screen. Roundhouse was what happened when raw teen energy smashed into a live stage and exploded into music, movement, and unapologetic weirdness. It was not just a sketch show. It was a stage, a rotating one literally, where comedy met chaos and somehow made sense of being a teenager in the 1990s. Roundhouse was messy, loud, and never afraid to take swings at real issues. Divorce, bullying, crushes, loneliness, it tackled all of it. But not with lectures or moral of the day endings. It used dance, it used music, it used fast cuts and louder voices than any adult was ready for. Every episode felt like a fever dream on roller skates, but it worked because it came from truth. This was a show made by young people, for young people, without a single ounce of condescension. The cast felt like your friends, the cooler, weirder ones who actually talked about stuff no one else would. One moment, you would be laughing at a sketch about school lunch. The next, you were suddenly thinking about what it meant to grow up in a broken home. And then, just like that, you were dancing again. Roundhouse made you feel seen, not polished, not perfect, just seen. It was the voice in your head screaming, "Why does no one talk about this?" And then suddenly, they did. It burned bright, burned fast, and left behind a legacy that still feels impossible to replicate. It was not just a kids' show. It was a stage for everything real, messy, and beautiful about growing up. Dr. Alex Woods was more than just a medical examiner on CSI Miami. She was the show's moral compass, the one person who saw the dead not as evidence, but as people. Her quiet moments with the victims, her whispered compassion, her grounded presence, they made a world of glitz and gunfire feel human. And then, in season 6, she left. The explanation? She needed to spend more time with her family. But it felt rushed, thin, like a form letter from someone who had already left the room. There was no emotional send-off, no hallway goodbye, just an absence where a soul used to be. No one picked up her mantle. No one walked into the morgue with the same reverence. She was replaced, yes, but never equaled. Her departure left the show with all the shine but none of the soul. The show replaced her, of course. But something was missing. The lab felt colder. The silence around her departure louder than any autopsy scene. It is said that the actress chose to leave for creative reasons, but that does not make the wound heal faster. Because in a show about speaking for the dead, it is ironic how quietly one of its most alive characters was buried. What does justice mean when even the voices of the living are forgotten? Eric Persullivan was the kind of weird you wished you could be. As Dewey on Malcolm in the Middle, he stole every scene without ever trying. He was odd, unfiltered, a little too smart, and strangely wise beyond his years. You never quite knew what he would say next, and that was the charm. In a show packed with chaos and punchlines, Dewey was the quiet chaos, the unexpected storm. And then, just like that, Eric faded into the silence. When the series ended, so did his career. Not with a bang, but with an empty space where we thought he would be. There were no major interviews, no public breakdowns, just Eric disappearing into the backdrop of real life. He made a couple of small appearances in the early 2000s, but nothing that felt like a return. And after a certain point, the world stopped asking when we would see him again. Because deep down, we knew the answer. Rumors have swirled, speculation has followed, but Eric has never stepped back into the spotlight to explain. And maybe he does not owe us that. Maybe his silence is its own kind of message, that life does not always need to be performed, that not every story gets a sequel. Sometimes the curtain falls and the actor just walks away. But there is something haunting about it, something unfinished. Because Dewey was not just a character. He was a mirror to the strange, fragile, brilliant side of being a kid. And the boy behind him? He chose something that most child stars never get. Anonymity, peace, privacy, a life off stage. Chad Allen was that rare mix of heartthrob and talent, one of those child actors who seemed to fit in anywhere. On Our House, he played the sensitive grandson in a multi-generational family. On My Two Dads, he showed up as the charming boy-next-door type. He had that windswept hair, the serious eyes, and the kind of presence that made casting directors feel like they struck gold. For a while, Chad Allen was teen television. He was the kind of actor who could break your heart with a look and make it okay again in the same scene. There was a real emotional fluency there, something that did not need a script to be felt. He had fans, he had momentum, he even had awards, and then he vanished. Part of that was intentional. Chad came out as gay in the early 2000s, but the outing was not on his terms. A tabloid outed him with a photo. At the time, that was still considered career suicide in a lot of circles. Roles dried up, casting calls slowed, and Hollywood, as progressive as it likes to seem, was not ready to make space for an openly gay leading man, especially one who had grown up in the public eye. So Chad took a different route. He turned toward activism, became a prominent voice in LGBTQ rights, went back to school, studied psychology. While the rest of the world waited for a comeback that never quite arrived, he was doing the hard, quiet work of becoming someone new. He officially retired from acting in 2015, not because he had to, but because he chose to. He said his purpose had changed, and that acting no longer felt like the right vessel for his voice. It is a story that is hard to tell without some sadness. Chad Allen had that thing, that spark. And it is easy to imagine a different world where he kept rising, kept shining, kept being part of the culture. But real life pulled him in another direction. The kid with the camera-ready smile and serious eyes turned into a man who wanted more than applause. And in the end, he vanished, not because he was forgotten, but because he needed to be found by something else. Chuck Cunningham was Richie's older brother in Happy Days, a tall, sporty figure who seemed destined to be part of the show's fabric. He played basketball. He gave Richie advice. He sat at the family dinner table. Then, like Judy Winslow, Chuck disappeared. Not just phased out, forgotten entirely. In later seasons, the Cunninghams were referred to as having only 2 children. Chuck's existence was retconned, like some kind of television ghost story. His disappearance gave birth to what would later be called the Chuck Cunningham syndrome, the phenomenon of characters vanishing from shows without any resolution. There was no missing poster on the fridge, no empty chair at the table that made the others pause. Even flashbacks seemed to sidestep his presence, as if the show's memory had been surgically wiped. For longtime viewers, it felt like a silent betrayal. He had been erased not just from the plot, but from the family's memory. It was not just that he disappeared. It was that his absence changed the family and no one acknowledged it. What does it say when a show's past becomes optional? Chuck was not just forgotten. He was erased from a show about nostalgia itself. Some say the actor left. Others say the show never quite knew what to do with him. But to viewers, especially younger ones, Chuck was a sibling who was never mourned. And that kind of forgetting leaves a deeper mark than we realize. How many other characters were written off so cleanly, we stopped believing they ever existed? Beetlejuice. The cartoon was like stepping into your weirdest dream and finding out someone had already drawn it, colored it in slime green, and made it funnier than you expected. It should not have worked. A creepy ghost from a dark comedy movie turned into a kids' show? That sounds like a bad idea on paper. But somehow, Beetlejuice the animated series was its own strange miracle. The show dialed back the horror and turned up the weird, way up. This Beetlejuice was more mischief than menace, more chaos than cruelty. He was loud, gross, brilliant, and totally impossible to predict. And he was best friends with Lydia, yes, the goth teenager from the movie, but in this version, she was his partner in crime, not his target. Together, they traveled between the real world and the neither world, where nothing made sense and everything had eyeballs. The art style was twisted but oddly beautiful. Everything looked like it came from a haunted toy box. And the jokes? They were non-stop. Beetlejuice cracked puns so fast you had to replay the episode just to catch half of them. But for all the goofiness, the heart of the show was Lydia. She was smart, confident, and unapologetically herself. And Beetlejuice, for all his flaws, always had her back. Their friendship was weird, but it worked, and it told kids something valuable. It is okay to be different. It is okay to be strange. In fact, it might just be your greatest strength. Michael Oliver was the kind of kid who could turn chaos into comedy. As Junior in Problem Child, he was everything the title promised: wild, loud, hilarious, and just a little dangerous. He was not your typical sweet-faced Hollywood kid. He was a troublemaker you could not help but love. And then, like the perfect punchline to a joke we did not see coming, he was gone. His exit was sudden, but the signs were always there. The Problem Child films made money, but they also made problems: legal disputes, managerial chaos, allegations of financial exploitation. Behind the scenes, Michael's world was unraveling before it even had a chance to begin. By the time he was a teenager, the industry had already burned him out. He did not just step away, he stepped back into anonymity. And he has rarely looked back. Today, Michael lives far from Hollywood's orbit. He is not trying to reclaim fame. He is not on reality shows or writing tell-all books. He is just living, quietly, on his terms. And that silence says more than any interview could. It says he chose peace over applause, privacy over profit. That, maybe the only happy ending left for a child actor, is to become someone the world forgets. It is easy to think of these stars as lost, but maybe they are not lost at all. Maybe they just escaped. And in Michael's case, maybe disappearing was the bravest thing he ever did. Which exit stuck with you the most? Tell us in the comments, like the video, and subscribe for more stories that still leave a mark.